The very worst kind of thinking. Detectors in the park. So let's talk seriously about Mr. Brainwash. ESFP's last laugh. So the great tragedy of life, of all of life probably, is that intuitives spend all this time struggling to get things right. You know? Like one way or the other, struggling to get their art right or their ideas right or something. Spend all this time struggling to get this shit right. Partially in the hopes that if you do get it right, you'll be rewarded accordingly. That in some capacity, you will be successful because of the rightness of your intuition. But the sad and stark reality is intuitives ain't got nothing on sensors. And we never will. Mr. Brainwash is this guy. I talked about him before in a live stream, but I wanted to begin this live stream by devoting my attention to it. He's an ESFP with absolutely no artistic talent, who's vastly more successful as an artist than almost any of the intuitives he followed around to learn the trick. It's like Mr. Brainwash has this incredibly primitive. No, he's a famous person, like a celebrity or whatever, I guess. So I learned about him in the Banksy documentary. He's somebody who would follow Banksy around and film him, and other people in that street art community. He'd follow him around and film him. Eventually, somebody asked him, "Why are you filming us all the time? What are you going to do with all this footage?" And he said he had no idea why he was doing it, or he just liked to do it. And when he'd be done videoing, he was videoing on tapes. He just put the tapes in a box. Bill Clinton is an ENFJ. But Mr. Brainwash was nice too. There's nothing wrong with Mr. Brainwash morally, okay? Mr. Brainwash was a super enthusiastic, hey, I'm your guy, like helper guy to all these artists. He was really excited by what they were doing because it involves going out in the middle of the night and painting stuff on walls. And everyone just started, everyone trusted him with good cause. He was there to be down to help these people and film them and all that stuff. I haven't heard anything about him since the documentary either, but I just watched the documentary, so that wasn't very long ago. The thing is, he seems like a cool guy. He's probably fun to hang out with or whatever. But he laughed all the way to the bank, not even knowing that he was laughing all the way to the bank. That's the thing that drives me it's just like, oh, this world we live in. The incredible irony of life in general, which is everybody thinks like, well, I want to be smart. I want to be intuitive. No, you fucking do not. No, you do not. Because it's like being intuitive means if I were a street artist intuitive, it would mean two things. It would mean half of my life I'm spent trying to figure out how I can get to be as good as Banksy. And the other half of my life is directed towards trying to be okay with a fundamental mediocrity that I can't shake awareness of, right? And then Mr. Brainwash shows up. He's also thinking to himself, oh, I want to be good like Banksy, okay? Except he doesn't have any concept of what good is, or that it's a thing even. And and he thinks he does understand it. So that's why he calls himself Mr. Brainwash. I figured it out. Here's what art is. It's all just brainwashing. It's like fourth slot NI just and imagine being an artist that's not Banksy, somebody with a second tier street artist, but still a million times more talented than Mr. Brainwash, and just watch him zoom right past you by completely missing the point about everything. It's like, I was watching that documentary, and you see the scenes where they're interviewing people at Mr. Brain Show's first show. They're interviewing, like, I guess what you would call either intuitives who are weak, really weak intuitives, or more likely what they're interviewing is sensors who think they understand and don't. Like, they're interviewing these people going, hey, Mr. Brainwash, he's really a genius. He's got such good stuff here. And, the intuitives watching are going, and fucking getting their asses beat by this ESFP who doesn't understand anything. Banksy's ship had to be rescued by the Coast Guard? Oh, really? I knew he had chartered he went to go rescue some migrants. I didn't know that the ship he got to rescue migrants was having problems. I had herself. So, and here's the hilarious kicker. If you were going to talk about some famous celebrity art music person who would totally be fooled by Mr. Brainwash, almost immediately you could think, Madonna? She's a complete moron. Yeah, Madonna has Mr. Brainwash as one of her album covers. Because as an ESFP herself, she can recognize ESFP genius in a heartbeat. ESFP genius. It's crazy. It really is. Try going 59 years in an INTJ. No thanks. No thank you. I'll pass. I don't need to read any further than that. Yeah, she embarrasses us all. This episode of the yeah, I know on herself. There's an episode of The Simpsons where one of the Simpsons family members creates a baby translator to get rich again after he's lost his fortune. And as they go to the mall, they see there's this one baby on a leash. You know how people put their babies on a leash sometimes? And the baby goes, goo goo gaga. And the baby translator says, this leash demeans us all. Mr. Brainwash demeans us all. Mr. Brainwash is feasting on the parts of human experience that fail. He's absolutely feasting on the fact that people aren't generally intuitive enough to tell when they're being fooled. He demeans us all by treating art and successfully treating art as though it were, a Chinese fast food restaurant. Chinese fast food restaurants are called things like Bubway, the sandwich restaurant, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, the chicken restaurant. It's like that, Chinese industry, so to speak. They don't believe in originality at all. They just say, okay, well, let's look at something successful from America and change the name slightly and do that. Well, that's Mr. Brainwash's idea of brilliant business acumen. Yeah, well, that's part of it, Winston's mom. So part of why Madonna embarrasses us all is that it's that horrible 6-slot FE from an ESFP. She doesn't get how her ridiculousness plays. She doesn't get how cringe she is. And worst of all, she thinks she's the opposite of cringe. It's like, okay, I do not care how cringe you are if you're not walking around going, I'm not cringe at all, yeah. But Madonna is exactly that. You know? It's like I want to sit her fucking down and just lambast the living shit out of her for about an hour in a circumstance where she has to sit there and listen to me. So she walks away, ashamed of herself like she deserves to be. Non-intuitives making horrible non-intuitive art disgust me. I don't know how else to put it. They disgust me. You know, and it's like, yeah, sure. ESFPs make absolutely fucking horrible art. Sure, no problem. But it's not just them. Like, when you hear me talk about the Dave Matthews Band, that's the authentic response of a person who understands to an ESTJ thinking they understand. You know, I would talk to Madonna for about 5 minutes before I said, okay, you better drop that fucking fake English accent right now, or I'm going to go over there and tear the fucking tea and crumpets out of you. Okay, well, see, here's the thing. The tipping point for Mr. Brainwash was not that groundbreaking footage. Oh, who wrote that, Mr. Brainwash? All right, well, yeah. The thing is, that documentary documented his great ESFP success. I can't make art. I know I'll be a hugely successful artist who sells a lot of art. You just said you can't make art. See, I told her, it doesn't matter. I'll hire people who can make art to make art for me and say it's mine. Mr. Brainwash. It's like saying, you know, I want to be a forest ranger because I love nature and the outdoors. And then hiring a bunch of gardeners to recreate nature inside your house. Watch Madonna's bizarre quarantine bathtub talk. No fake English accents are allowed from Madonna, okay? That just needs to be shoved right up her butt. She has no business saying things or thinking things or having opinions about things. She just stay in her little English mansion and shut her fucking face. She and Dave Matthews can sit around and talk about how they're getting it right. You know, that's the thing. You can barely blame the guy because for anything. What's absolutely clear in that documentary is that he has no idea at all how deeply offensive his success is. He has no concept of it. Yeah, Bill Walton can offer important commentary such as, that reminds me of the time that Bill Walton did something important. Who, alongside Banksy, brings the art to the masses. I don't even know what to say. It's like, I read 10 a.m. something, talk to somebody on the internet here. I got 10 a.m. Tomorrow I got a couple of work things scheduled for debate in English and stuff. I don't mind being an English teacher again. Half of my work right now is English rather than debate. It's not bad. It's fine. I used to think like I will never teach English again, but no, it's fine. I don't dislike it. You can add to my list. I have an ongoing list, sort of casual list in my head of things everybody's wrong about, but they're convinced they're right about. Like fun things to argue. Evolution is one, because all the smart people think they're right about evolution and support it. And I didn't watch any interview. Interview of Matt Acuff? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I watched any interview. I don't know who Matt Acuff is. Never heard of him. Yeah, last night I just watching him into bed. Cloud, you're not even psychotic. You are like, you're kind of like the LeBron James of ESFPs. Now, granted, if life were playing basketball, then you're like the LeBron James of ESFPs. But remember, ESFPs are always playing at a different sport. So you're like the LeBron James of ESFPs, but life's not basketball. Thank you, Rusmos. I've ruined evolution for you. Oh, right. So evolution's one. Another one is organic farming. People are convinced that organic farming is good. This is what I just determined, made the list yesterday. People think organic farming is good for the environment. But because of the reduced amounts of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and stuff. But in actuality, organic farming is horrible for the environment, because the crop yields are so much dramatically lower, and unlike chemical composition of the soil, raw quantity of land is finite. So the simple matter of fact is, the amount of environmental damage done by growing enough food to feed people is lower if you maximize yield than if you minimize pollution. So, it's like, for all of these people who say, listen, my organic eat, it's a lifestyle choice. I'm supporting the right thing. They are harming the environment, not supporting it. Okay, so it's like, this is the sort of thing that sensors and feelers just go, yeah, that's not 6 feet. Your roommate hates onions. There's this way back long ago, when I was making Vox Monitor, the podcast review podcast in the early 2000s. We reviewed a we reviewed a podcast called Nobody Likes Onions, and I liked it a lot. And it's still, the guy still exists, Patrick from Nobody Likes Onions. If you Google Nobody Likes Onions, that guy started making podcasts around the same time I started making podcasts back in the early 2000s, and he's a comedian, and he's pretty successful. But the central narrative that I've gotten from him the last time I checked and see what was going on over there, which was maybe a year ago or something, was he seems to be hammering this narrative. Maybe I'm just not talented enough. Like, he's been trying so hard to succeed for such a long time. And he's got a fair amount of success. Like, he supports himself with his podcast. It's not even on YouTube or anything. It's like he's got his own website. It's all like walled garden or whatever. You know what is terribly ironic? The shop page on Mr. Brainwash isn't working correctly. For a second, I thought it was a meta-ironic deliberate thing. Yeah, that would be way too smart. See, this is why you end up mistyping somebody like Cloud as an ESFP at first. This is the intuitive's pitfall. We generally conclude that there must be more subtext here than just none. But that's just, you're giving people too much credit, you know? If your roommate is an a-hole, then they earned it. If not, then you are an a-hole. Well, then why are you living with him, Cloud? Maybe you shouldn't live with somebody who hates you with every cell of his body. Some of my cells aren't even capable of emotion, so that's pretty impressive. Okay, so BMAX says, but organic doesn't kill off the bees and the bats. I mean, I agree it's a cost-benefit analysis. There are ways in which organic farming is superior for the environment to conventional farming. And the death of insects and potentially bats, I don't really know how much non-organic farming has to do with that or not. I'm not sure. But no, I am, Evelyn. That's the downside of conventional farming, is the phosphates, the nitrates, stuff like that enter the ecosystem at a higher concentration than they ever naturally would. But of course, one of the other arguments is the quality of nutrients of organic farming. I mean, only people who are completely detached from objectivity say that organic food's more healthy. They're just, even most of the pro-organic people don't try to make that claim. Wait a second, Cloud. I'd never thought about that. You could be an ENFP. Did it ever occur to you, Eric? I totally didn't think about that. He's looking to regenerative farming. Seems to have decent high yield animal foods and protects topsoil for long-term use of the land. Right. Well, look, I'm not trying to argue that conventional farming is good in the way that it currently is, or that we oughtn't to improve conventional farming to make it less environmentally damaging. I'm not saying any of either of those things. What I am saying is, if you currently are somebody who's eating organic vegetables because you think it's better for the environment, on balance, when you add up all the impacts and costs and everything, it's at best a crapshoot. And most likely, conventional farming is better. Because remember, every time we switch a farm from conventional to organic, we cut down another bit of forest to build some more farm to make up for the loss of yield. So yes, maybe bees and bats are killed by conventional farming, but a whole swath of forest is killed by non-conventional farming. The less yield you get, the more land you have to devote towards farming. And any land devoted towards farming necessarily ruins the ecosystem that was there formerly, you know? So that's the thing. When you look at it on balance, the harms from using more land for farming outweigh the harms of using less land more dirtily for farming. So the thing is, it's like, again, I'm not trying to tell anybody that we already know how to farm perfectly without as well as we can. But I am saying that simply this: if there's a person out there who makes the claim that they eat organic for the environment, they're fooling themselves. They're not. They're not helping the environment. That's it. They're not. You know, they're slightly altering the impact calculus so that some harms are maximized and some harms are minimized. But it's not the case that eating organic is good for the environment. So that's one of the things I'll add to my list of arguments that I like to make. I mean, there's no doubt that veganism is good for the environment. That's indisputable. Oh, you're talking about soil nutrient. Okay, Rusmos, I can see that point. Obviously, if we wanted to for the environment, yeah, veganism is good for the environment. There's no doubt about that. But it's not good for people, I don't think. Yeah, look, the Native American way where they bury a dead fish with the plant seeds is great. I've done that with weed before. If you bury a fish beneath your weed plant, then it grows great. You disagree that veganism is good for the environment? I mean, look, it's pretty hard to dispute that farming large meat animals like cows is an inefficient way to convert energy into calories for humans. So it's like it's got this extra step. You eat the corn and I'll eat you. So I don't have to eat as much and get maximal energy from it. But that's not a very efficient way to actually get calories if your concern isn't about the people but about the environment. What about doing farming and buildings with artificial lighting so it takes less land? Certain foods would work with that. You know, some things work well with controlled lighting and some things need more real sunlight. You have to find foods from all over the world to eat in the winter. Are you taking into account all the fuel from the transport system? Well, Evelyn, are you talking about veganism now or organics? No, I understand the benefit of eating animals, Evelyn. I'm just saying that look, it's another thing is that single purpose meat animals like cows, because like other kind of animals maybe are not single purpose. Like sheep, you can take off their wool or you can eat them. Evelyn asks, that's kind of a specious argument because what we have to conclude about veganism is this, that no matter what kind of dietary preference you have, if you want to maintain that dietary preference throughout the year, you're going to end up eating food that's been flown in. You can't eat year-round from local sources no matter whether you're vegan or not. Non-vegans don't eat year-round from local sources either. So that's non-unique to veganism and a specious argument. But nobody does. So we're talking about the actual impacts of eating vegan. If you choose to be vegan, it may impact you in a way that means you eat more food that's traveled further and less food that's local. It might be that way a little bit, but it's not the case that most of the meat we eat is necessarily locally sourced. So there's that. And additionally, with the travel costs and the extra carbon emissions, I'm not going to concede that these extra carbon emissions have a meaningful impact that's negative, because it's not clear at all what the curve is for warming and carbon. It's crazy that we talk so much about climate change as though we understand it and know what we should do or something, but I've never heard anybody tell me, well, what kind of curve is the curve that relates carbon to warming. If it's just a line, which is what we all seem to be operating under the assumption of, okay, that's one thing. But what if it's like this? Well, that's runaway greenhouse effect. We've heard about that before. That's another possibility. But what if it's this? You know, what if with each additional bit of carbon we put into the atmosphere, the amount of total warming per carbon goes down, that it's diminishing returns? Does anybody know the answer to this? Increased oil spills? Come on. That's called FX topical. You're really stretching an impact that's far away from the thing you're advocating. Okay, Aerostar, would you ask Diamond some NI questions when you finish the gardening arc? I don't know what to ask as an NI question necessarily. But the thing is this, remember that the question of eating meat or not is a positive moral question, not a negative moral question, because animals don't have rights. So whatever we conclude about it, it's going to be a holistic conclusion. It's not going to be reducibly defensible. Diamond, NI question. If you have 5 pickles, where did you get them? To be or not to use Plan B? That is the question. Plan B. I mean, the thing I like about Plan B is it compels people to experience a consequence. So it's like chicks are like, he speeded up inside of me. I can make sure I'm not pregnant, but it's going to make me physically uncomfortable. But this is the thing. I don't think it's ever happened in my life that I have accidentally shot my load up into some chick. It's never happened. So it's like Plan B is kind of a lie, you know? That's not how life goes. It's not like, whoops, you know what you're doing. Here's another fun argument you could use with to confuse smart people, so to speak. Okay, well, Stuart Johnson has some interesting reasoning here. I don't claim to be an expert on system dynamics like that, but I'm just saying, it seems like since everybody in the world seems to have an opinion about climate change, that everybody in the world must have both asked and answered this question already, right? Because if you don't know what the curve looks like between carbon and warming, you can't possibly go any further than that question regarding the subject. So it's like, hold on. Everybody in the world seems to have an opinion about this, but to have an opinion about it, you need to know point X. So this must have been already answered, right? As far as I can tell, there's no definitive answer on it. I like your reasoning, Stuart Johnson, but I've not seen any sort of consensus about the matter, and I'm not even seeing any suggestions on how to test that. I mean, I like the way you're reasoning it, Stuart Johnson. You're comparing against another planet, but the thing is, I mean, the heat source is so different that it's it's hard to know whether there's comparability there or not. And the atmospheric makeup is so different that isolating the carbon as a factor in warming is almost impossible. But most importantly, what I would say is the lesson here is this. For everybody in the world, but only a tiny percentage of the population can understand what I'm saying when I say this, which is so frustrating. Make sure you have information that is necessary, prerequisite to holding a position before you hold a position. So, for example, you can't hold a position on COVID at all until you have certain questions answered. And saying that the lack of an answer to those questions means we err on the side of caution. That might sound nice, but that's called throwing yourself off a cliff. Anytime you justify things with appeals to ignorance, we ought to do X because we don't know why, you end up with self-inflicted wounds, guaranteed. Massive sometimes, like with the COVID thing. People didn't pay attention. Diamond, shame on you. Shame on you. As a matter of fact, what we now know about COVID is that of all diseases humans could get, the one you wish on your most beloved family member more than any other is probably COVID. It's got a lower fatality rate than just about any other virus we've ever documented. So this is what I'm talking about, Diamond. You have opinions without knowledge. And the problem isn't that your opinion is wrong. The problem is that your process of coming up with opinions is wrong. You think it's okay to draw conclusions in circumstances where you're not qualified to draw a conclusion because you don't know a piece of information you need to know to hold an informed opinion about something. So remember, of course, also, I have never advocated that any individual shouldn't take whatever precautions they want to prevent themselves from getting COVID. My point has always been, nobody's arguing that. Nobody's saying, hey, let us do what we want regarding COVID. Everyone's saying, hey, everybody else must be forced to do what I think is right to do about COVID, despite the fact that I'm not qualified to hold an opinion about it, because I don't know pieces of information that are necessary for me to know before my opinion can be meaningful. I think a lot of people are allergic to uncertainty. It's wrong position is greater than no position kind of thinking. I agree with you. There's a serious problem with ambiguity intolerance. You as in the collective you. Right, but the thing is, that's the problem. You have no opinion on COVID because the data seems BS. I'm glad to hear that. But, Diamond, I want you to be honest. Did you have an opinion about it at first? Did they fool you at first? They fooled almost everybody at first. They didn't fool me at all for a second. Nicholas Watson, I totally believe that. I'm not remotely even surprised if that's true. If what you say here is completely 100% true, it doesn't surprise me at all. Nicholas Watson says, did you know the hilarious part is that only 6% of the known COVID-19 fatalities are strictly due to COVID? Keeping in mind that 0.4% at most of people who get COVID die, and only 6% of that 0.4% actually die just because of COVID. So you are talking about the least risky thing since sliced bread. You wanted to stay home like usual, but I got knots in my stomach. I got knots in my stomach too. Not about COVID, but at the horrible reality that comes with being intuitive. The problem with being a special type, a rare type or whatever, is it's a curse. You're trying to explain to a bunch of cats how they shouldn't go into that yard because they're dogs, but they don't understand you. And they keep climbing over the wall and getting torn to pieces. Hindsight conveniently favors the ignorant. You're right. Well, because people who are big on hindsight don't think it matters if they're right now. They can just be right eventually. Of course, if you're compelling your wrongness on everybody as public policy, that's where we have a serious problem. That's where you run afoul of my foot up your ass. Because if you're going to try to compel your stupidity onto everybody, you better have some justifications for it. Would you choose to be a different type if you could? No, I mean, I'm not saying, obviously, I'm me. It's impossible to imagine myself being me and also a different person. So I'm not unhappy with this type. It's only within the last maybe 5 or 6 years that I've started to not ignore the tragedy, right? Being an ENTP means being empowered to ignore the tragedy. Well, I don't give a fuck, whatever. I just think about something different. But, all these battles on YouTube, talking to all these various people, who, some of whom are fair in their conversation with me, some of whom are only talking not to eliminate wrongness, if somebody is talking to me and it turns out that their purpose is never to eliminate wrongness, then there's going to be little capacity for common ground. Like when Cloud's communicating about stuff, he's not trying to eliminate wrongness. He's trying to eliminate distinctions. Like, you can't box that. You can't narrowly describe that like that. Humans are too complicated. Humans are too unique, like that kind of thing, right? So that's if I'm going to have, like, we're going to butt heads with somebody, I'm going to butt heads with somebody who's not interested in eliminating wrong things. Now, you could argue easily enough, and I'm not disputing this, that an ESFP might say that there's no good purpose to eliminating these position statements as incorrect because, it's just a map and reality is more important or something like that. You just can't put people into 16 boxes. How many boxes would I need? Well, here's the other thing, Stuart Johnson, and this is where we have to parse carefully. Even if the death rate was very high, and thus going outside would be an act of aggression, the max damage of this aggression would be being forced to stay inside, which is less than lockdown. Okay, so what I would say is, even if the death rate were very high, you could only be considered culpable for your behavior if you knowingly went out while having that disease and being able to contage other people, right? Be contagious. If you don't know you have it, then it is ridiculous to say that you have to err on the side of caution until you know one way or the other. Again, it's an appeal to ignorance. We're putting the onus on the wrong parties. The onus belongs on those who want to prevent themselves from getting it, not on those who want to go about their business as normal. Negligence can be illegal, but you have to knowingly be negligent. So if I knowingly have the disease and negligently go out and infect a bunch of people, like I just don't care about contaging them, then maybe you're right. But in the current status quo, what we've got is a circumstance that says, because we don't know if you're contagious, we are going to treat you as though you are. And that's not correct. That's an appeal to ignorance. You cannot justify your behavior because of what you don't know. I mean, you didn't pass my TI polar test, Cloud. You tested positive for it, for sure. If that's what you mean by pass. And it's definitely not the case that you've seen TI polars pass the TI polar test. Because passing TI polar test means you're not TI polar. Now, if you want to say, no, what I'm saying, Eric, is that your test is invalidated, that's a legitimate thing that you could say. but you'd have to go about arguing that a different way than you're arguing it. So, right now you're not saying anything. No, Cloud, when I asked you those questions, you Googled the answer. Well, okay, true. If you cheat, you can pass the test. Cheating is a good way to pass that test. And the fact that you don't think it matters how you passed it is further proof of your TI polar. Okay, Cloud. Well, look, I don't want to argue with you about evidence, data, not an evidence. So it's like if you want to come on, okay, look, if you want to go to autonomy right now, I will do TI test on you, and you may very well prove to me that you're not TI polar. That's possible, but you don't want to do that. You're not interested in eliminating the wrong option. You see what I'm saying? You could eliminate that option right now. Just go to autonomy, wherever.com/autonomy. I'll spend about 20 minutes just really testing your TI, and we'll find out. So if you are a decent human being, in my opinion, you want to eliminate the wrong thing. I would like to eliminate the wrong thing. If I'm wrong, I'd like to eliminate that wrongness. But because you're an ESFP, you hate eliminating wrongness. No, yeah, he's right, exactly. No, the matter is still in dispute. So instead of choosing to resolve the question definitively, you choose to leave it in dispute. So that's the opposite of eliminating wrongness. The fact that you're choosing to leave it in dispute and obliviously then saying, I love eliminating wrongness, is again an indication that you do not know what TI is. The self is the archetype of the physical totality or the wholeness. It is not identical with the ego, but placed itself somehow above, or in other words. Okay, so that's my point, Cloud. That's why it's frustrating to me because on the one hand, the reality is TI is how we eliminate wrongness because we allow things to be defined, and that means they're definitely not right? So you say, I love eliminating wrongness, and then you acknowledge your TI polar, and you don't see any contradiction there. And the reason you're not interested in figuring out more ideationally about it is because ideation for you is it's a way of triggering responses in other people rather than resolving ideas. So I'm going to go down my list of fun things to argue because everybody's wrong about. So number one is evolution. Number two, McDonald's. Okay. McDonald's is great fun to argue. If you explain to people that McDonald's is healthy and it's just as healthy or more healthy than other things, people will be like, what? Until you actually ask them some questions, you realize they have no idea why they think McDonald's is unhealthy. They have no concept at all why they think McDonald's is unhealthy, but they believe it wholeheartedly. And it's why are we where we are in the world right now? It's because heuristics gradually replaced parsing, in the sense that before the internet, there was a deference to authority intellectually. To say that, well, scientists say was the final sort of point about the matter. But now, instead, we've got this other reality. And what we determine is actually these scientists who say have been very hit and miss at best, right? Like, we've got an entire world that's building narratives on the concept of evolution. Evolution bleeds into everything. Like, people go, well, the reason this species is like this, and they give some evolutionary explanation. Jordan Peterson says things like, the reason the color red sells stuff better is because humans, back when they were hunter-gatherers, there was an evolutionary advantage to seeing ripe fruit. Of course, nobody ever explains why we only evolved when we were hunter-gatherers. It's like all the evolution occurs during hunter-gatherer time. And then, but if we were already hunter-gatherers, wouldn't we have already evolved that thing? I mean, it's so silly. Why do the color red sell products more? And there's this evolutionary explanation, right? This is what happens when we allow heuristics to run the show. Everybody assumes evolution's right because it's been positioned as people who know how to do the process themselves correctly and people who don't. And since I'm not going to do the process myself, my heuristic says side with those people. Generative anthropology has my answer. Well, if you know that, Xavier Reeves, then you must have my answer too. And why don't you articulate it for me? One thing I'm sure of is that an NI-DOM recognizes archetypes more than any other personality type. I did this early on in life and later found out most people do not. What do you think? I know you're addressing that to yourself, but I want to address that too, which is, as a matter of fact, NI-DOMs will try to make non-archetypal things archetypal. So one example of making something non-archetypal archetypal is the rule, you should drink 8 glasses of water a day. Of course, how many glasses of water you should drink is entirely dependent on your specifics. How big you are and how hot it is and how much you sweat and a bunch of other shit. Winston's mom, do not do that to me. I'm not going to read something. Now, granted, this is not your fault because you're just helping Xavier Reeves. But my point to Xavier Reeves is this. If anytime somebody says, here's an answer to your argument or here's an answer to your question, they need to tell me what that answer is. Do not need to reference somebody else. First of all, microevolution is not a thing. Genomic plasticity or adaptability of a species genome is nothing to do with evolution at all. It's totally unrelated. Calling it microevolution and macroevolution, those are silly terms. The problem with evolution, Otaku Ranter says, I think evolution is a decent theory. No, you do think that, but you have no idea what you think that decent theory is. Genomic plasticity means that, for example, all human beings aren't identical. Some are taller, some are a little shorter, some are fatter, some are thinner. There's variation in the phenotype, even if the genetic blueprint is fundamentally the same. And so certain sports within that genome can be bred if you wanted to. You can say, let's only breed the instances of this genome that express the elasticity within the genome over here, like the friendly foxes in Russia, right? So the reason we know that evolution is bullshit in part is you can see how this plasticity is limited. It's possible for me to work at a job where I have to lift heavy things and for it to make my muscles bigger. I'm going to adapt to it. It's going to get easier to lift those things. It's not possible for me to adapt to a job that needs me to breathe underwater because there's a quality called identity, and that constrains something, what it can be. So to reiterate about the evolution thing, it's very important, Otaku Ranter, before you say anything further about evolution or whatever, try to articulate what you think it is. Like, I can articulate what plate tectonics is. It's a theory that argues that the reason continents move away from each other is not because the Earth is expanding slowly, but rather because the continents themselves are objects that are floating on a semi-viscous in a semi-viscous medium. So I've just explained the mechanism and how it differs from the alternative explanation in a way that makes easy sense, right? You can understand what I'm saying. Now, granted, there's a lot more complicated system dynamics to this floating continent idea, and it may seem non-intuitive but continents are such heavy things. How could they float? But regardless, I've at least explained the difference between the warrants. You can conceive of what I'm explaining in some fashion. The problem with evolution is it's hard to negate because it's not making a real affirmation. So evolution says it explains where species came from, but it doesn't explain where species came from. So when I go to negate it, I don't have an explanation to negate. And I got to hammer the fact that it fails to meet its burden to affirm. It's the one making the claim that it explains things, but it doesn't. So Evelyn, preservatives, non-unique to McDonald's. You eat just as many preservatives at home for food from the grocery store as you do at McDonald's. Number 2, refined grains, eating sugar without the necessary nutrients to process it. Same, again, non-unique to McDonald's. There's no reason to assume that you are going to eat less refined grains if you eat store-bought bread. Where do you think McDonald's gets their bread? So if you're going to say McDonald's is unhealthy, you need to point to qualities of McDonald's that are unique to McDonald's, or else everything's unhealthy. But then you're just saying food's unhealthy. Modern food's unhealthy. You're not saying McDonald's is unhealthy. Okay, cool. The point, and I'm not trying to start any fights with anybody about evolution or anything else. It's due to the formation of significance and deferral of violence itself. Hunter-gatherers were first formalized pack, if you will. So you're saying that the reason, so you're conceding that the process, the mechanism that causes evolution to occur shut off at some point? Is that what you're saying? You're conceding that? All right, yeah, I'm not trying to be battly here or adversarial. I'm trying to understand. I mean, the thing is, Cloud points out that because things that are physically purposeless occur anyway, they couldn't have evolved. But I don't agree with that necessarily, Cloud. That's not, the thing is, it would be the case that if evolution occurred by some mechanism, that it would have artifacts of non-utility in it. So there would be genetic aspects of the creature that didn't emerge from utilitarian reasons, but nevertheless got into the genome and continued to persist. Yeah, that's my claim, Evelyn S. There's nothing particularly unhealthy about McDonald's. So that any claim you're going to say as to why McDonald's is unhealthy would also apply to a hamburger you make at home for most people. Because most people think McDonald's is uniquely unhealthy. At least in America, people think that. Oh my God, I can't believe you're eating McDonald's. That is so unhealthy. It would be better for me to make a hamburger at home and eat it? Oh, way better. Why? I have no idea. But I saw Super Size Me. So look, when it says, Mom, every time I've clicked one of these links that you send about evolution, it's making the same mistake. It's begging the question. It's saying, if we assume that the status quo came about because of changing complexity levels over time in genomes, then this would be proof of that. Those things aren't arguments. That's not real. That's not thinking. Beneficial genetic traits lead to organisms reproducing more, and those traits can be grouped on. Okay, so Stuart Johnson, here's the thing. You're sidestepping the core issue. Beneficial genetic traits that come from where? If you're arguing mutation, that's been debunked. There are no positive mutations. Okay, but when you say hunter-gatherers seem to have a higher correlation with evolutionary standards, it's both begging the question and impossible to warrant. Okay, so Nicholas Watson says, oh yeah, they explain how crossbreeding created a lemon from limes, and also how did we breed wolves to become dogs? Well, the answer to that is that it's proof that evolution doesn't exist. So if we stop breeding dogs, the species dog returns to the genetic mean. It doesn't break into new species. If you let all the dogs go, Chihuahuas, Great Danes, blah, 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 and on like a garden world, let's say, where there are no people at all, and just walk away and come back in 1,000 years, you will see that the dogs have reverted to some sort of mean, a medium dog. Because, of course, all the evolutionary forces that we can establish do the exact opposite of what evolutionists say they do. Evolution does eliminate weakness and sickness from the genome. In other words, variation from the genome likely kills the individual that has that variation to keep the genome healthy. Now, I've hypothesized that in many trillions of years, because of the actual mechanics of genetics that we can establish, the truth is the older a genome is, the less healthy it becomes. In other words, because of genetic drift and because of epigenetics, you get extra shit into your genome beyond its pure form, so to speak, and that's always bad. Again, Mom, that's not evolution. If you're begging the question, I'm not even going to bother with it. The fact that facial muscle anatomy in dogs and wolves is what it is does not mean that we can conclude it came to be that way via your mechanism. You've never explained the mechanism, but you still seem to support evolution. I mean, look, think about the foxes. Forget about dogs and wolves for a second, because we can narrow our scope of evidence much better with foxes. In Russia, they bred a breed of friendly foxes that act like dogs, but they're foxes. They domesticated them. The reason we know evolution is not real is it doesn't matter how many thousands of years they push that, those foxes will still be able to breed with regular foxes, just as dogs can still breed and produce reproductively viable offspring with wolves. Okay, but see, if a few thousand years for dogs is too little time for mutations, then we know already you're on the wrong track, because mutations are always deleterious. There are no positive mutations. The best mutations that we could ever see in any place in nature are nearly neutral. And the other thing, Stuart Johnson, we've been breeding dogs for 10,000 years, which means we've been applying way more sexual selection pressure on the species than nature ever could in 10 billion years, because we're willfully doing it. So we know for a fact that exploiting the elasticity of a genome to create breeds or differentiation, different varieties within the species, doesn't ever create new species, no matter how hard we try. Remember also that there's generation length. So even if we couldn't do it with dogs, surely we could do it with fruit flies, because they have very short generational length. If you say 10,000 years is not enough time for us to see evolution in dogs, well, then it must be enough time for us to see evolution in fruit flies, because their generational time is so much shorter and there's so many more generations. Additionally, if in fact species changed over time, or that there was variation within a genome, then that led to changing in species over time, then we'd see increasing genetic diversity with increasing population size of a species. We don't see that. It doesn't matter if there's 1 trillion members of a species or 10, the amount of diversity within the genome is equivalent. Okay, wolves and dogs did not split from their common ancestor. Wolves were bred to maximize specific traits within the genomic elasticity of wolf. But no matter how hard we push that, dogs are still fundamentally wolves. They can still mate and produce viable offspring. I mean, the problem with evolution is myriad. But the number one problem with it is this: it's definitionally impossible. A genome, a species, is a self-replicating genome. There's never been a case where two individual organisms can be called a species at all unless they only make exactly another one of themselves. That's definitionally what it is. Yeah, absolutely, Stuart Johnson. I've researched evolution quite a bit, and I always look with every evolutionary notion that people throw out there. I'm always searching hard for where their prediction is and how I can falsify it. Because mostly what evolutionists do is they don't do that. They don't produce predictions that you can falsify. And so we know right there, okay, these people aren't doing science. They're doing religion. I mean, the same arguments that people use for evolution, you could use for creationism. Well, if then why are Well, that's the point. You don't know the answer to why. You claim you do, and when I ask you to explain why, you ask me the question why. That means you're not explaining anything. Look, the bottom line is this, guys. There's so many ways you can be sure evolution is bullshit. Simply look at generation length. There are some species that have very short generations. So there'll be 10,000 opportunities for increased complexity in the genome for every one opportunity of this long-lived species. So because of that, we can definitely make predictions about what we would see if the notions of evolutionary mechanisms had any validity at all. We can make predictions, right? If in fact variations within the genome become distinct species over time through some sort of sexual selection, then we can make really clear predictions about how species with very short generational spans would behave differently from our time frame perspective than species with very long generational spans. But they don't. They don't behave differently at all. No, I'm specifically saying nobody. You use the word evolution as though you know what it means. You have no idea what it means. You can't explain to me what it means. You can't explain to me at all how evolution explains anything, and yet you believe in it anyway. You believe in the label evolution. And you say, well, look, there must be some legitimate evolutionists out there. There's plenty of legitimate genetic science. Genetics is a real thing. There's no disputing that. But I'm not outlining atheists who use science as a means to justify their atheism. Not at all. I'm not talking about atheism. Never came into the question. What I am saying is that the reason evolutionists are so dogmatic is because they think it's the alternative to creationism. That's not me. I'm not thinking that at all. I'm way out in front on this issue. Well, Evelyn asks, I understand that retroviruses can insert their genes into our DNA. However, remember, viruses are always less complex than the organism they infect. So how do they account for increased complexity? Thanks, Otaku. See, I'm not as way out in front as you are, Alan. I'm way out in front in the sense of like 6 years ago, I decided to look into it. I'd always said, it seems like bullshit, but I never really thought about it. GM and Cosmic Skeptic are scrubs. Is right. What was my last argument? I don't remember what it was. No, my point is this. Xavier reads, you need to remember there are two things people do in the world. They affirm or negate. If I'm claiming to explain something, I'm affirming. The burden is on me to actually explain, therefore. If somebody wants to negate my explanation, they don't have to provide an alternate explanation. They just have to point out that I'm not actually explaining things. Oh, treating science as if it's a religion? Well, look, that's sort of an emotional thing, like treating science as a religion emotionally or something. What I'm saying is arguing what purports to be a scientific theory with the same arguments that one uses to argue for religious dogmas. Like, in other words, well, if God doesn't exist, then explain why there's is the same thing that evolutionists do. They make that argument, and they don't understand that's what they're doing. Because I'm not complaining about evolutionary science. I'm not complaining about science. I'm not complaining about scientists. I'm not complaining about atheists. I'm complaining that people don't understand how they came to conclusions and how different things require different approaches to coming to conclusions. In other words, I'm not concerned about people being wrong. I'm concerned about people thinking wrong, like, guaranteeing they're going to be wrong forever. If you don't approach questions with meta-analysis first, what kind of question is this? Then chances are, no matter how right your answer is within its frame, it's always going to fall short. I don't define scientific theory. I do say this. People who claim they explain things should actually explain things, or we shouldn't believe their claim. In other words, the burden is on the person who's making the claim to establish the truth of it if it's in dispute. This is not a science thing. This is a fundamental reality of communication. It is God's truth that communication is holy because it enforces reciprocal burdens. Just as if I claimed to explain where species came from, you'd want me to actually explain it. So too does the reciprocal burden apply. If you claim to explain where species come from, then I have a reason to expect that you actually can explain it. And if you can't, then you don't. Then your claim is not substantiated. Okay, what's truth? So there's a three-legged approach to understanding truth that functions as a human heuristic for it. First of all, whereas validity is universal, truth is not. Truth is determined by something called reciprocal slope. Rhetorical slope. So rhetorical slope refers to basically the confluence of three truth testing metrics that we generally use. Two of them are accounted for already in the philosophy literature. They usually battle against each other, but the reality is it's an incorporation of both of them, namely the correspondence theory of truth and the carrier-bearer theory of truth. So basically, two factors come into play here. One, consensus about what language means, and the inherent quality of language, that is to say, it's binary, not sliding scale. To the extent that it's going to be arbitrary, it's going to be arbitrarily definitive rather than arbitrarily mushy. So the other aspect of truth is the carrier, what's it called? The bearer. I forget the other word. Like language bears the truth, reality provides it or something. That's the other theory, right? So that's the case as well. How could they both be right, Eric? Well, because, again, the fundamental problem there is you're not approaching the question properly. Not you, but one is not approaching the question properly to begin with. To approach the question properly to begin with is to say, okay, first of all, is truth a term, an umbrella term, or do we use the word in a lot of different ways, actually? And when we use it in different ways, we need to understand those different ways before we can understand it holistically at all. For example, if I make a statement about something where the data is objective, say a physical object, such as this is a pack of Marlboro Reds, the objectivity of the data definitionally means that it is accessible by everybody equally. There's no hidden part of the data. So statements about objective data, we apply a different truth standard than statements about subjective data or statements about abstract objective data. This is concrete objective data. If we're going to talk about truth, we remember truth is a value we assign to sentences, statements. Only statements have truth value. Questions don't. Commands don't. Non-words don't. Only statements have truth value. So if we're not constraining ourselves properly to begin with, we're initiating our exploration of the question from the wrong starting point and are guaranteed to be wrong. This is the thing I keep hammering. The reason it doesn't matter what specific thing C.S. Joseph says might be right is because it's systemically ill. As an understanding, as a model, as an abstract understanding of the world, it's sick, it's diseased because it was built with that disease built into it. If you don't do it right, you're going to make a diseased model. Does the statement, the sky looks beautiful today, have a truth value? Yes, that's a statement, so it has a truth value. Now, the truth value of it is either true, false, or no truth value. Now, in this case, that's a great segue, Cloud. You bring me to the third leg of the truth, of how we actually determine truth. And the third leg is intentionality. So we may not be able to tell that subjective factor, but whether or not the Cloud statement, the sky looks beautiful today, is true or not, is determined by the subjective reality within Cloud. Does he actually think it looks beautiful today? If so, he's telling the truth. Or is he secretly think it looks ugly today? If so, then he's telling a lie. So we have to include that third leg of truth testing schematics, I guess you'd say, or something, or metrics or whatever, if we want to correctly articulate our relationship with the word truth. Now, once we are correctly articulated our relationship with the word truth, then if we want to make an advocacy about it, we can. But you should never make an advocacy until you correctly articulated the existing positions. No, what I just said, Xavier reads, is exact contradictory to that. I'm saying truth isn't a universalist consideration, unlike validity. And which statements we afford the status of truth to, and whether or not that's a good affording of status or a correct affording of status of truth to the thing, it depends on the kind of statement being made, as indicated by Cloud's statement. So whether or not Cloud's statement is true is determined by a matter of that is only accessible as subjective data. Cloud can access the data, but I can't. Nevertheless, we can afford a status of truth or false to the statement. But remember, true and false are matters of concern to the map, not the territory. Okay, well, Xavier reads, my philosophy label is a correctist. So what I do is I only argue the correct positions, and I don't care what philosopher they came from or what school they're related to, because all philosophy is just argumentation anyway. So I take only the good arguments, I jettison all of the bad arguments, and I'm correct about everything. That's the kind of philosopher I am. Morality has nothing to do with MBTI, but the attributes described by MBTI have been empirically demonstrated overwhelmingly. Okay, Alan Bryan, they're not attributes. They're not attributes, they're configurations. They're configure arrangements, you know? They're not attributes. A cognitive function is not an attribute, okay? I hate to be nitpicky, but it's not an attribute. How I pay attention is how I be who I am. It's not something I have. The sky is beautiful today is nothing but small talk. Okay, well then maybe it's small true or small false, but it still could be afforded a status or small no truth value. So, for example, if I say this statement, my love is a beautiful butterfly, you could correctly argue that that's a false statement, or you could correctly argue that that statement has no truth value, but you could not correctly argue that the statement is true. Because at best, it's a metaphor. Okay, Xavier reads, good thinkers always reach this spot, right? I agree. This is not an appropriate medium to debate a very complex and rich area of reasoning and argumentation. You are at a distinct disadvantage, and it's not fair for us to be arguing back and forth where I have a voice and you only have a voice via text. So I totally agree with you. I'm not disputing that, but I'm also pretty self-indulgent, and I like this way of dealing with people because it means I can always deal with people one at a time, one-on-one, even though there's a bunch of them around. I don't like situations where I have to do talking with a group, like 3 or 4 people, because then my FE considerations become paramount. I have to make sure when I'm talking, I look at each person to include them, and I have to make sure everybody gets their turn to talk, and it's just like, fuck this noise. I got things to say, all right? So, yeah, but Xavier reads, first of all, let me just say, respect, you clearly are a good thinker. And I didn't mean to, maybe I did mean to, but I regret having gone a little bit adversarial there with you, because I'm trying to reduce my adversarialness so that instead of, treating what I perceive as somebody else's wrongness with the appropriate amount of revulsion and force, I'll go with, let me see if I can find some ways to make my superior understanding more palatable to people, EO has a problem? What's EO? Are you talking about that Michael Jackson ride at Disneyland? Captain EO? Oh, everyone. I didn't know EO was short for everyone. Everyone doesn't really need a shortening, I don't think. Well, maybe it does. Because needs a shortening, that's for sure. Golden ratio is an NI thing, not an FI thing, Claude. You wanting golden ratio to be an FI thing, that's an FI thing. Yeah, BC. I use BC sometimes. The other thing is, another word that needs to be shortened is probably. I like probably, but also probably, Probly is fine. Probably is fine too, Prolly. But probably, too many syllables for that word that you use so much, Probably. That's one too many syllables. You don't need that extra syllable there. No, FI doesn't seek things, okay? People seek things. You be through the attentional matter. The attentional matter has no interests. I'm assuming I'm an ENTP from all the resources I've gathered over the past couple of years, but you could be wrong. Well, Xavier reads, you are one of 2 types. You are an ENTP or an INTP. And that's it. I can tell you that right now. Or a possibly, very low possibility, you could also be an INFJ who can also do this to some extent, although they won't sit there and maintain it for a long stretch of time, So you are ENTP, INTP, or INFJ. One of those 3 types. That's all you could possibly be. You're clearly TI, So I believe you're ENTP. The other thing is, Xavier reads, if you are an ENTP, we're sort of doomed to butt heads because you're not a chick. I can get along with chick ENTPs, okay? I guess because I don't see them as filling my social niche. But ENFJ can't. No, ENFJ is look. You can tell how ENFJ reasons by listening to that guy we talked to last night, Sean. He was doing ENFJ reasoning the whole time. Everything is subsumed by his FE frame and his universalist frame, and his amusingly oblivious SI polar, in which, well, of course, your particular experiences don't matter at all. That's not a reason for anything. You know? So, no, Xavier Reeds is not an ENFJ. For sure, he's not an ENFJ. But he could be INFJ, INTP, or ENTP. One of those three he could be. I like ENFJs a lot. And they have a skill that everybody else in the world, including me, should envy. Okay? This is the ENFJ's magic power. They're not afraid to ask for something, suggest something, make something happen or whatever, because they know that while there's, it's potentially an FE complication, they're very certain they can handle untangling that complication on the fly. So why has Sean made 2 videos with me recently? Is it because I specifically want to talk to Sean? No. It's because he's like, hey, can I come talk to you? Most people who aren't ENFJs won't do that. Of course, if you just do it without any FE awareness, hey, can I have hours of your time and not pay you anything? Then I'm going to be like, okay, just no, you can't. I'm busy. But if you have a little intuition about me and what I like in terms of FE and stuff, and the fact that I like doing things abruptly out of nowhere. I don't like planning things really. If you understand me a little bit, then I'm sure he felt like an absolutely confident captain of a ship that he was perfectly comfortable sailing. So probably a lot of people who periodically think to themselves, I want to go on and make a video with Eric. I want to talk to him about something. INTPs do. Sometimes INTPs will send me an email and say, hey, I'd like to make a video with you about this. I say, okay, cool. Let's do it right now. They go, okay, well, I'll follow up in a week or two with a possible suggestion for a time, and they never do. And that's INTP. Can I have hours and hours of your time and pay you in hours and hours of my time? I don't know. How are you going to spend those hours of your time? Are you going to clean my room? Because then maybe. Are you going to go back and properly tag and shit my videos? That would be helpful. If you want to spend hours of your time doing that, fine, I'll give you hours of my time. The thing is, I'm not the one asking to talk to them. That's the difference, email them. They want to talk to me. ENTJs love you. They even envy me because my TE is strong and I am good at their things, but they are not good at mine. Cloud, that makes perfect sense. ENTJs, their primary self-value is SE. Getting shit handled, getting shit rolling, whatever. But, I envy ESFPs a little bit myself. I envy Mr. Brainwash's ability to live in this cocoon of beautiful illusion, where I'm very rebellious when it comes to structure, but I realize the importance of structure itself. Distinctions between, that's a different person. See, I miss Xavier Reeds and Stuart Johnson. You're almost the same person because you both have brown circles. It's just Xavier Reeds' circle is slightly more tan and Stuart Johnson's is more brown. You really should put a picture in your circle, even if it's just like a random bit of textured cloth or something, Otherwise, I could confuse you. I could start calling Xavier Johnson and Stuart Reeds. Oh, here comes Raphael to throw out some personal attacks. You liar! No, I didn't read them. But since it's JP's favorite author, I will when the time has come. You didn't read who? Who's JP's favorite author? I'm curious about that. I bet it's something terrible. I bet it's some horrible, stupid shit. Let's see. Oh, Dostoevsky? I'll have to check. I'll be honest, I haven't ever read any Dostoevsky, so I can't really have an opinion about it. I have an opinion about Russian literature that's not very positive, but I can't paint Dostoevsky with that brush without reading it. In general, Raphael, listen, okay, fine, not a personal thing. What Winston's mom here says, you can apply to your whole life. Raphael Avellaris, you don't need to struggle. Just end the sentence right there. You don't need to struggle. The illusion of zero-sum attainment is quite tempting, I know. I am suckered in by its will-o-wispiness all the time. But as I'm slowly learning, things always go better when I try to engage the other person, including their personhood, not just their ideas. Now, I'm never going to exclusively or even primarily engage a person's personhood. I'll always primarily engage their ideas. But engaging their ideas is a process that goes more smoothly for me when I remember to engage the people as well and treat them as people, not just the sources of wrong ideas. Cloud is a cloud full of Skittles. He's a rainbow of fruit flavors. Cloud, congratulations. You're a rainbow of fruit flavors. Why you need to read Dostoevsky, Professor Jordan Peterson. There's something about Jordan Peterson that makes me want to just throw everything I was just saying right out the window and go full blast adversarial and just blast his ass. The gall of that fucking TE user thinking he can explain things well. The gall. You know, it's like, clean my room? Go fuck yourself. You don't hear me telling you to clean your room, idiot. You make a book telling people what to do. Your frame is not the universal truth for everybody that makes it such that your advice actually applies. You know, if you don't meaningfully distinguish between how people be, understand, do, think, whatever, and you try to give advice that applies to everybody, you're just being silly. A desperately poor law student killed a pawnbroker. There we have the story, maximally distilled of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I mean, look, my taste in media is surprisingly bubblegum. You know, I have a very fully realized intuitive understanding of media, but I like media that works on a very NI level, which means, you know, some of my favorite movies are rather cartoony. Some of my favorite songs are very, very catchy. Like, I would much rather, I am much more likely to sing the praises of the genius of the movie Kick-Ass than I am to talk about Dostoevsky literature ever, which is something that an intuitive thinker has to come to terms with. It used to be that my happy third made me want to be more fancy so I could impress people or something. Coming to terms with your polar FI means realizing, well, what you actually like matters a lot more. I repeat myself some. I repeat myself plenty. And the reason is because I might be repeating myself, but it might be new to you. Like, people come in and ask me a question that they've never asked me before. They never heard me answer before. I may have been asked it 50,000 times, but I'll still, God damn it. Automated media, I've told you enough already. Will you stop with that stupid garbage? I think Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris might be worth that. Sam Harris is fine. I respect Sam Harris. Richard Dawkins is a joke. The only reason I won't just fully lambast his ass is because he's dead. Sam Harris, I rather respect. he's too much. He's trying to make TI supreme, but you can't do that, obviously. And that's because he's third slot TI. He's INFJ. True, not every cartoon beats Dostoevsky or the other way around. And there are some fancy literature stuff that I really like a lot. For example, I really liked Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus when I read it a long time ago. Because now I want to impress with my humbleness. I mean, I want my self to be more palatable to other people. It's not so much that I want to impress with my humbleness, is that I don't want to annoy people with my arrogance or with expressing notions that somehow I'm superior. I am also Alpha Quadrant, so I'm very egalitarian, democratic, you might say. But you're not completely incorrect either. I am aware of the FE implications of humility, arrogance, and stuff like that. But I'll also say this. That one of the things I came to terms with in the last 6 years is I'm not going to engage in false modesty anymore, which I used to. So if, in fact, I will try not to spend a lot of time focusing on things that I'm not being falsely modest about, maybe. But if asked about whatever, I'm going to tell the truth, directly the truth. So, well, do you think you're so good of a musical artist, Eric? I'll tell you exactly what I think about myself. Or do you really think you can be president? I'll tell you exactly what I think. It may sound crazy arrogant or self-important or whatever, but I'm not going to lie and be falsely modest. What distinctions do you draw between slots 1 through 4 and slots 5 through 8? And why must function axes have either both functions front stack or both functions back stack? Well, the reason for that is because they're your 1 and your 4, your axes functions are two halves of the same process. So any SI, let's use that as an example, any coming up with a lot of ideas or talking out a lot of ideas, SI archiving things, keeping track of ideas. So if I'm always coming up with new ideas, one of my problems is necessarily going to be I have a mess of stuff that needs to be archived properly. Okay. If I'm an SI Dom, I'm going to reach a situation where I have everything archived properly. I need now more ideas to archive. So there's a inverse proportionality relationship that's implicit in axes functions. But it's also the case that there's a complementary relationship implicit in axes functions. So, for example, one of the ways I come up with new ideas is I begin with a starter of something from my memory, SI. And then I know what that is and deviate from it. How does FE complement TI? So FE and TI are necessary balancing and complementary things, because if we just had FE, then you'd only have to be communicatively smooth, but words couldn't be used to understand things properly. If you only had TI, then you wouldn't be persuasive. You'd just be right. And the thing is, if you're an FETI person, you're always balancing those two things. I am assuming you mean what you say because I'm TI, but I'm acknowledging that you might not say exactly what you mean because I'm FE. And if I only have one half of those, then I'm not adequately empowered to deal with the range of stuff that has to be dealt with in communication. Look at TE, FI. FITE is basically, I know what I want, and I'm going to figure out how to get it. TIFE is, I know what's correct, and I'm going to figure out how to convince you. Well, I mean, the point is, yes, it matters, because while a TI DOM or a TI tool user may much more highly value being correct than convincing you, because we're talking about how human beings attend to the conditional binary communicative range of things in the world, persuasion matters. It's communication, after all. You're trying to convey things to another person. And if, for a lot of people, whenever you go, you're wrong, and here's why, you're not conveying to them information about the ideas they're saying. You're conveying to them, from their perspective, your opinion about yourself and them. Oh, you think you're so much smarter than me. That's not what I said. I said you're wrong because blah, 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 right? Xavier reads, you are not an ENFP. There's no way you're an ENFP. No ENFP in history has ever made the correct choices argumentationally that you made earlier. ENFPs seem to devote their entire life to making the wrong argumentational choice. It's like you can see the difference between ENFP and ENTP with that guy that booted me from his channel, that astrology guy that Rachel was watching. So I didn't even say anything. I didn't even contradict him or criticize him or anything. But I made a couple of sort of very gentle jokes that weren't jokes about anybody there or anything that's precious or important. Mostly jokes about my lack of understanding of astrology. Made one joke actually, and I got banned. Why? Because he could smell on me the clarity, and for an ENFP, I'm the enemy in that regard. He's trying to talk about how beautifully all together the mushiness of the world is one. And I'm explicitly saying, oh, that's the way to get to the wrong place for sure. We need to do the exact opposite of that. Okay, so Stuart Johnson, why are slot mechanics the way they are? My point is that if you can only play with one side of the question if you want to be meaningfully engaged in it. So in other words, either it's the case that the relationship between NE and SI is, as I described, archiving ideas and blah, blah, blah. Then we call that relationship first slot, fourth slot. And you say, why isn't it fifth slot? Well, if we were going to call it fifth slot, it would have these things. How do I define front stack? I mean, I don't define front stack, but I would say that what I do is I tell you the role of each slot. I don't think much to be resolved by making general statements about front and back stack that won't hold up on the specifics. So here's the thing. The first slot functions as an implicit value and an absolute value, which means the reason why you're doing what you're doing now and not something else is due to your dominant function. But you aren't very much a slave to its values, although you will value them. So as an NE Dom, I value novelty, but I'm not a slave to novelty. It's sort of a minimum level of a minimum standard it has to meet for me to want to go in there is that there be something interestingly or new in there. But I don't prioritize the value of novelty over other values necessarily, because it's an implicit value. It determines where I am and what I'm doing, not how I'm approaching it in the moment necessarily. Although intentionally it will, in the sense that whatever I'm presented with, I'm going to respond with some ideation. I'm going to engage it ideationally because it's my nature. So, all right, the first slot is implicit value, absolute value. Second slot is instrumentally valued, but functions as a framework value for communication in general for me with TI. The third is an absolute value, a scorecard function. In other words, you're selfish with your third. You feel paid off when your third goes down properly, and you don't care about other people's payoff in their third. This demonstrates my dad, for example. He's got third slot NE. So he wants to talk and not listen. I've got third slot FE. I want to be paid attention to and praised and not pay attention to and praised. Fourth slot is an instrumental value again. The even numbers are basically instrumental. The odds are absolute. Fourth slot's an instrumental, but I think that with my epistemology functions, the way I see it, I don't know if this is a 4 or 5 thing or if it's specific to the epistemology functions, that epistemology functions work in 2 aspects. So my SI can know real time what my body's feeling, or it can know abstractly what's happened before or what I'm keeping track of, right? In my opinion, my SI value differs between the aspects. So I have SI physical, in other words, experiencing my body feelings as an absolute value. I like to feel tingly and get in the bath or whatever. I like the feeling of drugs entering the system. I used to drink. I love the feeling of the warm alcohol going down in my stomach. That's SI real time. But I see SI turn-based as instrumental. I have to keep track of my schedule and shit, but I don't take any satisfaction from it inherently. If the 1 through 4 relation is 2 functions working well together, then why? I didn't say they were working well together. I said it's first and foremost, it's the excess of one and the lack of another. So because I'm an NE-DOM, I'm going to have a whole bunch of mess that still needs to be archived because I'm not balanced in my NE and SE. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's using it well together, right? But I will say that there's also, the thing I was saying about 1-4 is that there's an implicit relationship between experiential knowing and universal ideation. So if I want to be novel, the best way for me to be novel is to take something that is an idea that I already have and add something unrelated to it to make a new disparate whole. I can also do it with stuff in the physical SE world, SE dimension. So I can say, I'm going to tell a story about a coffee cup that was bright and yellow and sunshiny because I took that from this thing, right? Or I could say, I'm going to tell a story about a kitty cat that got stuck in a fence. Now I'm pulling a memory of when I lived in Temple City and my cat got her paw stuck between 2 fence slats. I just pulled something random, I don't know. And the point is, I can build the NE off of that too. So Eagle, I'll get to your question in a second. Okay, I like that question. I'll get to it in a second. Number 2, why are the strengths so different? How is that different from 1-2? Okay, so when we talk about strengths, it's misleading term to use. We should talk about cognitive function in terms of percentage of total hours spent. Like most of the hours of the day, I'm going to have some of my attention on the channel that's extroverted intuition. In other words, some parts of the day, I'm never going to be thinking possibilities about something, but most of the time I'll be doing some of that. Exactly 2 of the 4 axes will have a large strength difference, 1, 4, 6, 7. Well, remember this. Okay, so look. The problem with the term strength is this. Let's say I've got a situation that requires me to determine who your grandmother's husband's wife's only daughter's only child is. Let's say there's some circumstances that requires you to do that. And you have the TI to successfully come to the correct conclusion. The context is asking you to deliberate logically. You've been able to produce the logical deliberation to arrive at the correct conclusion. Do you have strong TI? What was strong enough in that instance? The real question is, what is the likelihood that you're going to turn to that attentional manner in any given moment or when appropriate? So the likelihood that I'm going to turn to my introverted feelings as an attentional manner when appropriate is very close to 0, no matter how appropriate it is. That doesn't mean I won't experience being in that attentional manner somehow, but it's not going to be willfully chosen, nor is it going to be consciously executed. FE can look like love bombing as it peacocks for 4th function and INTPs, but during the idealizing stage of relationships, FE users will love bomb and FI users will eat it up. The idealizing stage of relationships is a serious problem for people because at the beginning, we're trying to be the best partner we can be for the other person. And after you settle down, you realize what's more important is that this person be the right partner for you. Define willful. Okay, so willful is both intentional and decided, or easily described as having been chosen. Every manner of attention a person engages in is intentional, because to pay attention to something means to intend to incorporate that into your ontology. So it's fair to say that a cognitive function can be defined as a form of intention. It can also be defined in an intentional manner. But it's not the case that all intentional attentions are conscious or willful. So I can choose to demonstrate a cognitive function that's easy for me to get. For example, if you say demonstrate extroverted intuition right now, I can make up a poem on the fly. I can trigger myself to willfully do that. Just like if you say take a deep breath, I can do that. But if you say make your heart pound faster, I can do that, but I have to approach it much more indirectly. I can't just go, okay, start pounding faster now. I have to exercise or work myself up or something, So in other words, in general, for backstack functions, well, first of all, Stuart Johnson, let me also say, it is not the case that all front stack functions are willful and all backstack functions are only intentional. The ones that seem to me the most purely intentional, that is to say most non-willful, are 7, 8, and 5 in that order. 6 is pretty willful. It's just you'll never choose to execute your will that way in isolation. So for me, my 6 o'clock function is TE. I don't ever seem to choose to use extroverted thinking to address or frame questions in my own life. But I expect the world to expect me to provide extroverted thinking, so I'm frequently demonstrating it. Somebody might say, well, how could you be, how could your TE be unconscious when you're demonstrating it all the time? Well, it's not really unconscious. I don't use those words. I don't say these are the conscious functions and the unconscious functions, because I don't think that's a good way to think about it. Is it empirical? I mean, to be empirical, I'd have to establish that, I don't know how you would empirically establish that exactly. It's observationally so. I mean, it's hard to contradict my observation. The rhetorical slope of negating my observation is steeper than affirming it. So in that regard, I would say there's good reason to prefer my explanation, but it's kind of it's a frame issue. It's like a lot of the stuff is this. We're going to define something as something. And the reason is because there's something there to be defined. Once we've nailed one thing down, then the other things are necessarily meow, meow, meow relationally. But ultimately, remember that the label itself is arbitrary. The definition that we apply, that we say is called TI, we could easily enough call that introverted logic, or we could call that deductive reasoning, or we could call it any number of things. And you say, well, how do you know that's TI? Well, I'm saying there exists this thing in cognition, this area of thing, that has the following attributes, and we're going to call it TI. And because it has the following attributes, definitionally, necessarily, it has this relation to related, but the related cognitive function matters. So, like, in other words, the reason my polar is what it is because my tool function is TI. Having a tool function of TI means specifically that as a default approach towards the world, whenever I encounter something that requires me to engage it in a meaningful way, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to parse it with TI. I'm going to say, is this communicatively defensible? Because that's my automatic, reflexive approach towards every problem, it means that the kind of attention that I will be least habituated to or least experienced in pain will be the other kind of deliberation function. And interesting calculus. We can see how, Stuart Johnson, we can see how these things are definitionally necessary. There is something in life called a disinterested calculus. Okay? That means we all understand that if I'm a referee at a basketball game, and I'm using a disinterested calculus, I'm calling the fouls based purely on what I see as fouls and ignoring which player or which team they're on, just calling the game based on what actually happens. And everybody understands that, on the other hand, I could take an interested calculus and make my calls in order to help one team win. So understand, we all acknowledge this distinction exists in the world, okay? Now, we can then easily see that if one always approaches the world by a disinterested calculus as a habit, as a reflexive way of being, that one will be very unused to and inexperienced and possibly blind to using an interested calculus. So this is why if you have TI second, you have to have FI 7th. It's definitionally necessitated. Because there are a finite number of hours in the day. When TE users, especially like ENTJs and stuff, talk about, or ESCs, talk about cognitive functions as though they were skills you can develop, that's called totally ignoring the predominant factor, namely time. You have a certain number of hours a day in which you're going to pay attention. It is a zero-sum question. In other words, if I choose to practice working on my left hand for the next hour, I will not be using my right hand for the next hour. And since I'm not just practicing getting ready to live, but everything I'm doing is actually living, there's no reason to prefer the less capable, less easy, less natural, more incompetent, more frustrating way of doing things. That's why people who think cognitive functions are like strengths that you build on your character or something, like you're making an MMORPG character. You go, oh, I need to boost my SI so it has a score of 18. No, it doesn't. You cannot spend more time doing something without spending less time doing something. No, TE sits in the 6th slot for ENTP because since I'm using TI as a tool function, I'm saying we should determine it's an instrumental value. I'm saying when we're engaging with each other, the engagement should be purposed in such a way, or should be done in such a way that we can eliminate certain wrong things. That means I'm TI tool. I'm saying that everything in life should at least allow this, and that's how we talk. We make determination about what's wrong and what's right. TE is the alternative frame. That's not why we talk. That's not why we know things. That's not why we say things. We say things to be useful and purposeful. If you're really right, you'll be purposeful as well. Well, I don't agree with that. If I'm really right, I have no link at all to purpose. But I understand that the world demands me all the time to not just be right, but to be useful. So I begrudgingly am useful. But I think caring about being useful is fundamentally the wrong thing. That if you're caring about being useful, you're not paying attention to what you should be paying attention to, whether or not you're right. So that's why it's countervalued. It's demonstrative, which is to say it's more than just intentional. It's willful in some sense. I can turn it on. I can say, okay, let me shift gears here. TE, okay. Let me just take a really careful survey of this thing and see what I see and not think I can figure it out without using the actual data. See, and this shows you how utterly pointless the tests you can take on the internet are for cognitive functions. So Diamond has gotten the following results: INTJ, INFJ, ENFP, INFP, ISFP, and INTP. I mean, that shows you that the online tests for cognitive functions and personality type are about as good as what color is your aura. If you ask 50 different people what color your aura is, you're going to get at least 10 different colors said in those 50 people. So we can conclude that that's probably just those people being arbitrary, right? With the cognitive function test, the same thing. If you're taking a bunch of different tests on the internet and you keep getting different results from them, then the reasonable thing to conclude is that cognitive functions must be bullshit. Of course, the actual correct conclusion is almost nobody understands them, and almost nobody knows how to test for them. And these tests are half-assed heuristics or half-assed mechanized processes of something that needs to be an art as much as a science. You can't really type somebody unless you can ask them questions, hear the response, and follow up. If you can't do that or aren't doing that, you're not typing people, really. You're just taking guesses and shit. What is going on with that bird? What is your problem, bird? What do you want? You're quite demanding. Where are you? Demanding birds. The gall of these birds with their squawking and tweeting and rah! Can't you see I'm live streaming? Goddamn birds. Well, what about the subjective opinion a person can have of a person? I mean, look, the thing about subjective opinions, remember, subjective doesn't mean wrong, and objective doesn't mean right. Subjective means an interested calculus. Your interests could very well align with the truth. If I want my team to win, and it actually wins, hooray for me. My subjective opinion that we're the best team, and my objective reality that we're the best team on the floor today are aligned with each other nicely. They're not in conflict. So subjectivity does not mean wrongness. But what it does mean is that it means communicable illegitimacy. I might be right about something, but if I say something like, the only way you can really know that I'm right is to experience it for yourself, well, then I'm not right about something communicatively. In other words, I can't communicate why I'm right about something, then I'm not right for the purposes of communication. Even if I prove correct, ultimately, in the conclusion, if I can't establish why I'm correct, then communicatively, I ought not be afforded a status of correctness. The burden's on me to establish why I'm correct. ESFPs, I don't see ESFPs as avoidant, but I can see why you would see them as such. The ESFP habit of shifting ground every time you put pressure on anything that they say, that I don't see it as avoidance. I see it as the limit of their TI. I'm assuming they're the type that will take a loop approach to social situations, not necessarily in an intentional way, and put others in harm's way. Well, look, the type who are most likely to offend at people on FE grounds are 8th slot FE users, ESTJs and ENTJs, because it's an unconscious and an undervalued tool function, intentional or unconscious. In other words, 8 is one that you have the least active, willful understanding of. One of the least. Yes, you could say your polar is even worse, but what I'm saying is I recognize my polar occasionally more really than I recognize my 8th slot. 8th slot is like a very helpful friend who's invisible. And you keep assuming that the reason this thing is done so well is because you must have done it so well, when really it's your invisible friend. So yeah, if you want to talk about like people who may cause harms with their careless FE stuff or their approach towards FE, 8th slot. It's countervalued. So in other words, caring about other people's perceptions is something you want to do on your own terms only. You don't want to have somebody else tell you to care about perceptions at all. You don't want to be criticized for not caring about perceptions well enough. if you're going to feel hatery or jealous towards somebody, it's probably going to be somebody with that function as their dominant. So like, if I'm going to feel jealous or hatery towards somebody, it's going to be ESTP probably, because they're better at the other action function, so much better at the other action function that it makes me feel slightly threatened as an action guy, even though we're in the other actions, you know? Like, I'm likely to defend I was telling you the other day, one thing that made me so mad when I was a kid was that I had a reputation, people would joke sometimes about how I always crashed my bike. Why did that make me so mad? Why did that make me so mad? Well, I think it's because I viewed it as critique of my SE. My thinking was this: I'm not a bike crasher. The only reason I crash my bike all the time is because I'm reading books while I'm riding my bike. That's not any different than crashing your bike all the time. You see? It's just saying, no, it shouldn't count as an SE failure because I'm not using SE. But if I wanted to use SE, it would be great. You know? It's like, what I just said there, I just realized it, and it's quite revelatory that my reasoning at the time as a kid was I shouldn't be criticized or thought of as being somebody who crashes his bike a lot, because the reason I crash my bike a lot is not because I'm bad at riding bikes, but because I'm not paying attention to riding a bike when I crash it. That's a really weird, like, it speaks volumes about how much of a territory map problem I had with life in general. There are territory types: INFJ, ENFJ, INTP, ENTP. Those are map types. Those are map types. There are map types: ENTP, INTP, INFJ, ENFJ. There are territory types: ESTJ, ISTJ, ESFP, ISFP. And then there are mixed types, everybody else. I'm a map type. Okay, so I'm actually going to wrap up this live stream now. Thank you, Elizabeth, for saying you enjoyed that story. And ENFP is territory 2. The reason I say ENFP is mixed is because, although I agree they're mixed primarily territory, is because, yes, ENFP has 1 M and 3 Ps, but the M comes first. So I say they're more mixed. Like, for example, it's also true that, yes, an ISFJ has a physical function first, SI, but the next 3 are MMM. The next 3 are metaphysical, so they're mixed. Even though they're physical dominant, the bulk of their attentional matters are metaphysical. Everybody's 3 and 1, but where it lands, it depends. So, like, the reason INFJ and ENFJ are the most metaphysical types are because it goes MMMP. Extrovert intuition is metaphysical. Introvert thinking metaphysical. Extrovert feeling metaphysical. Introvert sensing is physical. Everybody has 3 of one and 1 of the other, but sometimes it's more balanced. Like, if for me, it's very top heavy with the M. For an ISFJ, they start with a heavy P, but then they balance it with lighter M's behind it. So that's what makes them more mixed, you know? So yeah, I'm going to split because I got a 10 a.m. thing. I want to go poo. I want to talk to Rachel about the fact that I saw the asteroid this morning. I saw it. It was easy to see. Totally easy to see. I got up at like 6 a.m. It was still dark. The moon was out. I looked up. And I'm like, oh my God, look at that fucking thing. It's like a big glowing thing right next to the moon. It's cool. In fact, I noted my dad was awake in the kitchen. I went in there and I said, hey, Dad, have you seen this thing? He hadn't heard about it. He had seen it, but he didn't know what it was. I got up at 6. I've been up for 2 hours. I actually got a good night's sleep last night. I've only been up for 2 hours. 2 hours and 15 minutes. Eric, do you think in the wake of artificial intelligence becoming more and more prominent, that Western society is moving towards an FI polar society? No, I don't think so. I don't know if it's going to be there tomorrow. No, I don't think so. It says it's going to pass today. But I was surprised to be able to see it at all because supposedly it's on the other side of the moon. And I don't understand what atmosphere is causing it to light up. You know, maybe it's just the heat from the sun is causing it to light up. Maybe it's like a comet or something. I don't know. Racism used to be fun. That would be a great t-shirt. You should totally get that t-shirt. I would totally wear that t-shirt. Racism used to be so fun. It still is. It's more hilarious now than ever. Here's the thing about race and racism. It's just like what that fruity English guy said. A fruity EHP English guy. What's his name? Wrote The Importance of Being Earnest. What's that guy's name? Fucking drawing a blank. I want to say Elliot Gould. That's not his name, Elliot Gould. Oscar Wilde, thank you. Same number of syllables. No, different syllables. Anyway, Oscar Wilde. He says something about war. That people will never stop fighting wars until they see it as vulgar rather than tragic. In other words, worthy of, it's like, you're embarrassing me. Racism or groupism in general, or hating people for random reasons or caring about stupid shit will never go away until people think of believing in race as stupid and embarrassing. Then we won't have to worry about it anymore. So in other words, anytime somebody seriously addresses the racial topic, you guarantee more racism. And anytime anybody makes fun of race entirely, the whole concept of it, especially being joyfully and playfully pantomiming racism, you undermine this attachment to an illusion that people have. There's an illusion called race that people made up in order to justify violating rights. Some people back in the old days, some sociopaths wanted to justify boundary violations, trespass against other human beings. And so they made up this concept of race to justify it. And what people who are like Black Lives Matter people, they don't understand. They're standing there on team slavery and being cheered on by the slavery coach because they bought that lie and they've internalized it. A couple of years ago, people would be shocked and appalled when I'd say slavery had nothing to do with race, even though it obviously doesn't. Now I've noticed people have evolved somewhat. I no longer get pushback when I say slavery has nothing to do with race. I mean, the thing about feelings, Finty Deluxe, is FI people and TI people are on the same side here. And FI people understand that the humanness is unique and also non-unique. So it's like, you are human. That's about as much as I can say about you, because your humanness is individual, authentic, and precious, and expressly you. Okay? I agree with that. So the feeling part of it is when a FI person is feeling strongly about race, what I'm saying is somebody's exploiting them. Somebody has exploited them. They pulled a switcheroo. They said, here's something that should be parsed with TI. Knowing that you're not going to parse with TI, you're going to parse with FI, I'm going to put it on your table anyway. And I'm going to know that you're going to use it wrongly, and I'm going to laugh behind my hand. So the thing is, I'm on your side. I don't like people doing that. Well, look, that's the thing, email analytics. Big boobed Asian woman has an initial advantage in a live stream right off the bat. Because obviously, anybody, man, woman, animal, would prefer to look at big boobed Asian woman over me. But ultimately, mostly people around here anyway engage in a live stream with the language that's being said and written here rather than with the visuals. So, you know, also, she probably didn't really do anything with her boobs. Like, if you got to see gradually, very slowly, increasingly more of them as the live stream went on, she'd probably do a lot better job of retaining viewers. That'd be a good way to have. That's a good idea. Let's say you're a big titted chick, and you want to have a live stream, but you don't really have any ideas. All you have to do is schedule for 1 hour long and develop an invention that's a shirt that starts off as a turtleneck and then on its own very gradually creeps down like this, like a plunging neckline. That's what it's called, a plunging neckline. And then right as it's like her boobs are being held in there by just this teeny thread over the nipples, it's cued, they're linked so that it automatically ends the live stream right before it shows the nipples. That live stream would have excellent viewer retention, I'm sure. It just have to be paced fast enough that after watching for a few seconds, you could tell that gradually you were getting to see more of her boobs. That would be so frustrating. I'd just be sitting there going, God, this is boring. Well, what am I going to do? Guess I got to watch it all the way through. I mean, now that she started showing the boobs a little bit, I have to wait until I see more of them. Shibuya Kaho? Okay, email Anthrax. I would like you to, when we're done with this live stream, I'm going to end it right now pretty soon. I want you to timestamp this and send this to her so she can hear my excellent advice. Because if she applies this strategy, I'm confident she will be more successful. She's a former porn star. Well, maybe she should go on OnlyFans. I hear people can make a lot of money on OnlyFans. I so wish I was a hot chick. I would make so much money showing my boobs on the internet. You would need to delete the stream right after. Why? As long as you don't show anything, right? You won't get in trouble. If it's just suggestive that you might eventually, so you can't fast forward. Well, look, what I'm saying is the strategy is to achieve better viewer retention during the live stream. So that is that point, though relevant to the larger question, is not actually negating my point, which is only trying to help her retain viewers, not trying to help her overall channel. Anyway, thank you all very much for being here. I love you with my heart, and I will see you later.